There are over 99 different ways a goblin speaks, but only one noise as generic as this one.
Hey gang, and welcome back. Just so you know, you can use the promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, one word, at flipsidegaming.com to get 10% off orders $10 or more. You can also use the promo code at Original Magic Art on everything except for paintings. And finally, you can use the code at mtg.multizone.ca to get 10% off of your orders of singles. Using the code will help you save some money and help out the channel at the same time. Just to let you know, Flipside Gaming is going to be giving away a full set of Commander 2019 when it releases to one lucky winner. The contest will be running from July 12th until August 26th, and all you have to do to enter is either use my promo code MTGMudsta, all caps, no spaces, on an order of over $10 or more, or you can send a stamped, self-addressed envelope or postcard to Flipside Gaming. It's one entry per person, so good luck, have fun, and I hope you win. Alright, we've got another game filmed at the Secret Bunker, and once more, Tony is joining us with his Korlash deck. He keeps an Armillary Sphere, 2 Swamps, Bojuka Bog, Urborg, Fire Shrieker, and Plague Wind. Adam is playing Meren, keeping a Swamp, 2 Forests, Entomb, Read the Bones, Victimize, and Sidisi, Undead Vizier. Scott is back with his Maelstrom Wanderer, keeping Taiga, Vizier of the Menagerie, Bloomtender, Acidic Slime, Reflecting Pool, Gaia's Cradle, and Bloodbraid Elf. Peter has joined the fray and is borrowing my Vial Smasher and Tymna deck, keeping a Mountain, Cabal Coffers, Plains, Demonic Tutor, Urborg, and By Force. Adam wins the die roll and starts us off. Adam plays a Swamp and passes. Tony plays an Urborg, passing to Scott. Scott plays a Tap Steam Vents and passes. Peter doubles up on the Swamps with another Urborg. Adam plays a Forest and casts Soul Ring. He then uses Read the Bones and bottoms both before drawing 2 and losing 2 life. Tony plays a Swamp and casts his Armillary Sphere before passing to Scott. Scott plays a Taiga and casts Bloomtender. Peter plays a Mountain and passes. Adam plays another Forest and brings out Meren. On Tony's upkeep, he cracks his Armillary Sphere to find 2 basics, putting them to hand. He then draws in his draw step, and he plays a Swamp in his main phase before passing. Scott drops a Gaia's Cradle for his land drop and casts Coiling Oracle. He reveals a Forest off the top and plays it. A Sylvan Ranger then hits the field, letting Scott go and find a Mountain, putting it to hand. The Cradle and the Forest then make 4 mana total, letting Scott cast his Vizier of the Menagerie. He looks at his top card and passes. Peter plays a Plains and casts Demonic Tutor in his main phase. He knows what he wants and passes to Adam. Adam plays a Swamp, and then an Acidic Slime makes short work of the Cradle. Adam then hits Tony for 3 with Meren, and he passes. Tony plays a Swamp and brings out Korlash, passing to Scott. Scott plays a Reflecting Pool and looks at his top card. He pays 1 for an Orcish Lumberjack off the top of his library, and he then puts Bloodbraid Elf onto the stack. Having looked at the top card, he knows what he'll hit, so he cascades into a Sylvan Scrying and goes to find a land of his choice and puts it to hand. He grabs Nykthos, which seems like a good card with all the green mana symbols on his field. Scott then casts a Birchlore Rangers, which is a card I don't often see outside of Legacy, and he passes to Peter. Peter's disappointed that I don't have a Toxic Deluge in my deck, but he does play a Swamp and uses the Blasphemous Act he found for only 1 red. With the Acidic Slime dying, Meren gives Adam another experience counter. Peter then drops Tymna and he passes. At the end of turn, Adam uses Entomb to find a card from his library and bins Shouldered. Adam plays another Swamp and drops Meren again. He moves to his end step, and using the Meren trigger, returns the Acidic Slime to his hand, passing to Tony. Tony plays a Swamp for turn, and then drops a Cryptcast. Scott drops a Wooded Foothills as his land for turn, cracking it and taking 1 to find a Stomping Grounds, taking a total of 3 to make it come in untapped. Paying 5, Scott casts his own Acidic Slime for revenge, and blows up Adam's Soul Ring. Peter plays a Mystifying Maze and makes a deal with Tony to let Tymna hit him as a thanks for dealing with Scott. Tony agrees and takes the 2, with Peter gaining 2 life. And in his second main phase, Peter pays 1 to Tymna's triggered ability to lose 1 life and draw a card. He then casts a Talisman of Indulgence, and then a Vial Smasher, passing. Adam plays a Swamp and casts Fauna Shaman, and he heads to combat. This time, Meren goes at Peter, hitting him for 3. Passing through his second main phase, Adam moves to his end of turn, and returns Shoulder to his hand from his graveyard with Meren's ability. Tony plays a Buried Ruin, and he casts Diabolic Tutor in his main phase. He then pays 6 to once again cast Korlash, and he passes to Scott. Scott drops a Scalding Tarn this time, and cracks it finding a Breeding Pool, and puts it onto the field tapped, losing only 1 life. He also heads to combat, this time swinging his Slime at Adam for 2, and he passes. Peter plays a Cabal Coffers from his hand, and he activates it to help cast Skullstorm. He gets 3 copies of the spell, and with the copies on the stack, Adam uses Abrupt Decay to try and destroy Vial Smasher. Peter then remembers to resolve the Vial Smasher trigger, and Peter rolls for it, with Vial Smasher hitting Tony for 9. We then move to resolve the Abrupt Decay, and Vial Smasher gets exploderized, and the first copy of Skullstorm resolves. Everyone sacrifices a creature for this copy, and then resolving the second one, Scott loses half of his life, while Adam and Tony lose another creature. The third and original spell then resolves, and all of Peter's opponents then lose half their life rounded up again. Peter then heads to combat, hitting Adam for 2 with Tymna, gaining 2 life, and then paying 1 into her post-combat trigger to lose 1 life and draw a card. Adam recasts the Acidic Slime he'd returned earlier, blowing up Peter's Cabal Coffers before passing to Tony. Tony drops a Bajuka Bog, hitting Peter's graveyard, and he casts Liliana of the Dark Realms. He upticks her to find a swamp, putting to his hand, and he passes. Scott drops the mountain he found earlier, and we then see a Momir Vig. Peter plays a Dragonskull Summit, and swings out Tymna at Tony again. She connects, gaining Peter 2 life, and once more he pays 1 into the post-combat trigger to lose 1 life and draw a card. Cathartic Reunion then hits the stack, with Peter discarding 2 cards and then drawing. He then recasts his Vial Smasher, and he passes to Adam. With the life totals dangerously low, Adam makes the right move with a Ravenous Chupacabra to come in and take out Vial Smasher. He then pays his last 3 mana into a Victimize, sacrificing the Chupacabra to bring back Meren and Fauna Shaman. Tony upticks Liliana to find a swamp, and he puts it to hand. He casts Korlash again, being completely tapped out, before passing to Scott. Scott plays his Nykthos, and he casts the Maelstrom Wanderer. He gets a bunch of triggers at this point, and he gets to arrange them in the order of his choosing. He chooses to layer it so that the Momir Vig trigger for a green creature triggers first, then he'll resolve his Cascades before finally drawing a card. This means he goes to tutor for a creature card, and puts Dragonlord Atarka on top of his library. We then move to the first Cascade, and we cascade into the Dragonlord, who in turn triggers Momir Vig's green creature ability, letting Scott find another creature card and tutoring it to the top. He puts Inferno Titan on top, and Dragonlord Atarka then resolves, entering the battlefield. Her Enter the Battlefield ability goes on the stack, and it deals 4 to Meren and 1 to Liliana. Scott then moves to his second Cascade, and we see the Inferno Titan, who comes in and deals 2 to the Fauna Shaman, and 1 to Peter with its Enter the Battlefield trigger. Finally, Scott resolves the Momir Vig trigger for casting a blue creature and draws a card. Scott then heads to combat, with everything having haste now, and he swings everything at Peter. The Inferno Titan triggers on attack, dealing 2 to Adam's Acidic Slime and 1 to Peter. And then Peter takes 23 points of damage, 7 of which is Commander. Scott then passes, and at the end of turn, Tony exiles Plaguewind to cast Force of Despair, wiping out everything that came into play this turn. Peter pays 5 for a Mana Geyser in his main phase, gaining 23 red mana. He drops a Conqueror's Flail, and then a Primal Amulet, before finally a Vial Smasher. He then equips Tymna with the Flail, and we then see an Inner Fire giving him a bit more mana, and more importantly, putting a counter on his amulet. Peter then hits to combat, with the remaining mana emptying, and he hits Scott for 5, gaining 5 life. Adam's turn is quite quick, as he draws and taps out to cast a Sheoldred before passing. Tony has to sacrifice Korlash on his upkeep, and he drops a Swamp in his main phase. He casts Withered Wretch before down-ticking Liliana to get a revenge kill on Sheoldred. Tony then activates the Wretch to exile Dragonlord Atarka and an acidic slime from Scott's graveyard, and he passes turn. Scott plays a Flooded Strand for his land drop and cracks it, taking one to find an island. He then crop rotations the forest he taps, and he goes to find an ancient tomb. Scott then taps out, taking a dangerous 2 damage from the tomb, and he casts Maelstrom Wanderer again. Once more, he gets to lair some triggers, resolving Momir Vig's ability for green creatures first. This lets him tutor, and he finds and puts Shardless Agent, putting it on top of his library before cascading into it. This gives him both of the triggers from Momir Vig plus another cascade, and he layers it to resolve the tutor part first as well. He finds and puts Priest Titania on top, cascading and casting her as well, which gives him another Momir Vig tutor trigger. This time, he puts Fierce Empath on top of his library, and then the Priest resolves. Scott then draws from the Shardless Agent Momir Vig triggered ability for casting a blue creature, and then the agent resolves. Scott then moves to resolve his second cascade from Maelstrom Wanderer, revealing a Regal Force, which he casts. This gives him yet another Momir Vig tutor trigger, and Scott then goes to find another creature. He puts Azuri on top, and then the Force enters, drawing Scott 5 cards. He then draws from the Momir Vig trigger from casting Maelstrom Wanderer as a blue creature, and then the Maelstrom Wanderer then resolves. Scott then taps the Priest for 2 green, using 1 to cast an Arbor Elf. The Arbor Elf then untaps Scott's Breeding Pool, and he taps it for another green, and he casts Green Sun Zenith where X is 1. He finds a Quirion Ranger, and bouncing the Breeding Pool with the Ranger's ability, he untaps his Priest. The Priest then gets tapped once more, and he's able to cast a Food Chain. Scott still has 1 green floating, and he exiles the Shardless Agent, Maelstrom Wanderer, and Quirion Ranger. This means he's got enough mana to recast Maelstrom Wanderer again, and here we go. We get the whole on cast trigger bonanza again, with Scott layering it like he did before. He finds Kiro's Follower, and puts it on top. He then cascades into it, and we go for another set of Momir Vig triggers. This lets Scott put Craterhoof on top, and he then draws it from Vig's trigger on blue creatures. We then move to the next cascade, and Scott hits a Beast Whisperer. He searches again, and finds a Phantasmal Image, putting it on top, then drawing it from the final Momir Vig trigger from the Maelstrom Wanderer. He then untaps Nykthos with a Follower, and we see an Elvish Archdruid come in with some of the remaining mana from Food Chain. Scott then layers his triggers from the Whisperer to resolve after the Momir Vig tutor trigger, and he finds and draws a Wireward Channeler. He then taps the Archdruid for 5 more mana, giving him 6 total floating, and he casts the Wireward Channeler. We then go through it again with Scott finding an Elvish Visionary and putting it on top and then drawing it. Nykthos then gets activated, making Scott a good 14 green mana, and he casts a Fierce Empath, opting not to search, then Azuri, skipping the search again, before finally dropping Craterhoof Behemoth. He's got the game at this point unless someone has another instant speed board wipe, but with none in sight, Scott's way to victory is clear as he swings at his board. Game review time. Holy cow, Scott's last turn was on fire! Momir Vig and Maelstrom Wanderer work beautifully in tandem, setting up the perfect cascades and basically making someone who's at 1 life and so far behind come out of nowhere and win. It was ridiculous, it was beautiful, I loved it, and this is why I love EDH. Unfortunately, there was a bit of bad to this game, and I do think that Tony was a bit too reactive, killing Shouldered with Liliana. He was certainly frustrated at that point, considering how many times that Korlash had died, but I think he needed to pause and take a second to absorb what Shouldered was going to do on Scott and Peter's turns. Had he waited at least 1 more time around the table, I think the game would have gone very differently, and I don't think Scott could have won had he not had the Momir Vig out. He would have been able to cascade with the Maelstrom Wanderer, that's true, but it would have been random what he hits. And then there's the middle. I think Peter using Gravestorm was a great example of clearing the board and dealing a ton of damage to his opponents, and it left him in a pretty great position for any big X spell to finish off the table. It also painted a giant target on his back, and basically made everyone want to gang up and kill him. Similarly, Adam bringing Shouldered out was a big kick me sign on his back, but he didn't really have much going on, and using Shouldered would have helped him get a bit more of a board presence, so I can understand his line of play. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/mtgmudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/mtgmudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.